Thank you so much for having me, and a very good morning. It's an accepted fact that we were in a recession prior to COVID. It also is an accepted fact that we had more than 10.8 million South Africans out of the labor market, unemployed. Sectors were contracting and business confidence was at an all-time low. I think what COVID has done is it has accentuated the existing fractures in our economy. I think today what we are hoping for is to hear a vision, a clear plan and efficacy on how the previous plans and the previous intended actions have actually been implemented by the president. I think it's very necessary for us to hear and to get a solid crafting of that vision so that South Africa's economic trajectory is actually curtailed and turned around.
Right. I want us to hold our conversation for a short while as we take the viewers to Parliament, where Xoli Mgambi is joined by the acting minister in the presidency, Dr Nthabiseng is also the Minister of Small Business. No doubt entrepreneurs will be watching the State of the Nation address very closely, Xoli.
Indeed, Mpho. Entrepreneurs in South Africa are going to be watching this State of the Nation address with a hawkish eye, if you like, because business is suffering at this time, Mpho. And in part, it's as a result of the current situation that the globe finds itself in, and that is COVID-19. But it's also important to point out, Mpho, that President Cyril Ramaphosa, when he took over the reins 3 years ago, and incidentally, by the way, Mpho, this month of February will mark 3 years since the president took over and addressed this very house behind us when he took over from then President Jacob Zuma. The economy was on its knees, but that situation has worsened. Mpho, let's speak now to Minister in the Presidency, as you've introduced her, Dr Nthabiseng, also Acting Minister in the Presidency, and that, of course, of small business. Minister, thank you very much. And again, I need to remind the viewers that the reason we're taking off our masks is because we are in the open air and we are socially distancing. So hopefully we're not going to get any backlash. Important, Minister, to put in this point about a failing economy that the president inherited, and it's worsened now by COVID-19. I just want to get your thoughts firstly about what can we expect from the president's speech this time around. Is it going to be a speech that's full of promises, or is it more about implementation?
Well, thank you and good day to you and the viewers, and we're hoping they're going to tune in and watch the president and listen to the president as he gives us marching orders. Where we are, you recall that the president in October tabled the Reconstruction and Recovery Plan of government. So the basis of our work around the economy is around the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. And of course, there have been discussions that is not detailed enough, and the president will outline the details of that plan to say it covers issues of energy security, because without energy security we cannot deal with the economy, we cannot industrialize, but also the focus around industrialization. We have tabled the portfolio that I hold of small business development. We have tabled the localization plan for SMME participation, and Minister Patel in the DTIC tabled the master plans of industrializing the country. So those are the things that so it's not promises, it's how is government actioning the economic recovery, how is government actioning its work to make sure that South Africans' lives are saved, but also their livelihoods are also saved.
Yeah, it's about actioning all these plans, Minister, but many, if we look at your portfolio of small business development, they've complained that they really have not gotten that much assistance. As I speak to you, we'll also have an economist in studio who also is talking about actioning the plans. Enough with the promises. It's about implementation.
So the major constraint that the country faces now is that the plans are good, but the resources are limited. So for instance, if you go to the portfolio that I'm responsible for, the small business development, though I'm still acting also in this other one, you find that we had we have a number of small businesses that requires assistance. But when we have to save lives, the budget of small business will have to be cut like any other budget, because we need to get money for vaccines. We need to make sure the hospitals are running so that the health of our people are done. So is that juggling act that we do. But also, as a government, we have set ourselves the partnership, the social compact with business, with labor, with communities, to say the money does not only have to come from government, the business must come in, labor must give something, but the communities must also do something to make sure. For instance, if we go back to the small businesses again, we talk about localization. So if you, the suit that you are wearing and the shirt, the tie, the elegantly that you're looking, if it's all made in South Africa and made by a small business, it's a contribution to make sure that that small business that may be looking for support from government is supported by you. So those are some of the things that we are working to make sure that everybody brings their shoulder to the wheel.
Minister, I'm going to ask you to stay exactly where you are as I throw back to studio to Mpho. Mpho, it's going to be a three-way conversation between ourselves here and you with the economist. Let's bring you back into the conversation while we pause with the minister.
Absolutely, Xoli. I'm still joined on this end by Dr Nthabiseng Moleko. And Dr Nthabiseng Moleko, we've listened to the minister speaking about plans being good and that resources are limited, mentioning verbs like how government is actioning the plans. And of course, there are many big question marks when it comes to the great plan and the implementation of this plan so that it makes a difference and spruces up the country's economy.
I think let's start with the numbers. Industrialization in South Africa has been constrained. The result of all the master plans, the National Industrial Policy Framework, EPAP, which is the Industrial Policy Action Plan 1, to the master plans contained therein, have led to a South Africa that is deindustrializing. So we know with the numbers, we're also losing employment in key subsectors, particularly these subsectors that could contribute to labor absorption. So I think we need to review the importance of the policy, of the trade policy, and I want to touch on development finance institutions, the resourcing of boosting non-tradable sectors, high labor absorptive sectors, and sectors such as agriculture, chemicals, machinery, and can. So I think we really must look at and review the implementation and that we have set for the industrialization of South Africa. We have deindustrialized. What this speaks to is that the possible incentives, the mechanisms, and the outcomes of those mechanisms isn't necessarily enabling us to export more and to actually improve our manufacturing value add as a proportion to GDP. The second point I want to touch on that the ministers touched on is the issue of resourcing. I want to appeal to the minister that the National Empowerment Fund, the CFAs, these development finance institutions that finance Black businesses, that finance new entrants into the economic subsectors that previously were not open to them, require capitalization. The reason for this is the liquidity and the constraints in the capital markets. We have seen that even with the 200 billion guarantee, the minister herself said, I think last year, that the main beneficiaries of this were white-owned businesses, up to 75%. But even the take-up of that 200 billion pool was taken up mainly only 16% or 16 billion of the 200 billion. So we're seeing that on the capital markets, if you want to improve liquidity, financing, resourcing, and improve financial inclusion to strengthen economic activity and entrance into the economy, you have got to get the state to finance your development finance institutions who are primarily looking at your PDIs and your SMMEs that are not currently on the balance sheet of your big banks. I think the third point I want to raise is the issue of regulation, the structure of the South African economy. If you look at your food, textiles, and your industrial subsectors, a lot of those are controlled by oligopolies. If the minister and the president tonight look at the regulatory framework that opens up entrance, SMMEs, into particularly subsectors that are controlled by oligopolies to remove the structural flaws and the inhibiting factors that limit entry into manufacturing and primarily food processing, agriculture, and labor absorptive sectors, I can tell you now, we would see a change in the economic outcomes. The last, pension funds and regulation 28 has been mentioned by the Minister of Finance. Where is that when we're talking about recapitalizing and improving liquidity in the financial sector and in also accessing increased financial inclusion for our DFIs? We've got to look at capital markets to resource because the state does not have the balance sheet or the funds anymore. And I think we need to use the surpluses that are accessible in the appropriate instruments that enable us to improve liquidity so that we can fund our activity, economic activity, and improve impetus for our SMMEs. These are not pipe dreams. These are tools that are used by countries to improve stimulus and packages when the state is in a fix.
Thanks. Let's leave it there for now and hold that thought as we continue this conversation. Xoli, you've just heard Dr. Moleko speaking and urging government to really look at the regulatory framework that opens up these doors for new entrants in this space.
Indeed, Mpho, listening very carefully to what Dr. Moleko is saying there and the criticism. Let's bring it back to the minister here in the presidency, acting minister in the presidency and minister of small business development. Minister, the complaint from small businesses, particularly emerging black businesses, is that the biggest beneficiaries of the COVID funds that are meant to help, or you look at development finance institutions, the biggest beneficiaries of these funds are established white-owned businesses. Where are black players and why is government not assisting?
I think we need to clarify this. In terms of the development funding institutions, the funds, the bulk of the support went to black emerging businesses. But the problem has been with the loan guarantee scheme which is run by the banks. And as a department and also the president and cabinet have come out to say, we want that scheme restructured so that the commercial banks who government has begged to say take risk on small businesses but also on emerging black businesses, because we've got a program for black industrialists and all other things. Yeah. You must take risk on them. But what is even interesting, remember the banks had initially committed to fund those who are their clients. But what is interesting, if you check the complaints that have come both to ourselves, the DTIC, and also to the president, is that even a black business which is a client of Bank X, they go to Bank X says, we cannot fund you because the position that you were in before the lockdown or before the 1st of April, which is the cutoff date, or the 1st or 28th of February, it was so dire we can't assist you. But that business, and interestingly, the very banks are fully aware that the economic situation of the country, remember, we were on recession by the time we got to a lockdown.
Let me interject there, Minister, because if banks are not willing to play ball, that's where you come in government and put the necessary pressure. Banks are risk appetite. They should have risk appetite, as the saying would go. So it would seem this time around they're not willing to take the risk. Why is that, and what is it that you are doing to put pressure?
So as cabinet, we took a decision that scheme is going to be restructured. As a Department of Small Business Development, we are saying we want other DFIs to participate in that, to take more risk, because that money is guaranteed by government, by the Reserve Bank. It's money of government that they are using, just that government will pay later. But we are also wanting non-bank funders to also participate in that scheme so that you can have it more accessible, readily accessible. But also the criteria that the banks are using, we're saying they must be relaxed. To say that you get other players in there and leave the banks alone is an issue, because if you recall, in the country we've been talking about the accessibility of the financial sector, more especially the commercial financial sector, for black businesses in general. It doesn't matter whether they're small or big.
Minister, we're completely out of time, but I have got to squeeze this question in. I know I've been told to wrap, but it's very important. For the economy, Minister, to be rejuvenated, we're sitting in a recession. The ratings agencies are breathing down our necks, as evidenced by Moody's just on Monday. Minister, for the economy to start working again, we obviously have got to get over the hurdle that is COVID-19. Can you say, as Minister in the presidency right now, that by the end of 2021, we will have inoculated 67% of the population?
The Department of Health has a program that they say by 2021, or latest 2022 early, they would have reached the population immunity that is required. And we are hoping that South Africans will play ball, because the immunization of vaccination is voluntary, so we cannot force anyone, but we are pleading that the vaccines that are there are there to save lives. They are not there to do any other thing. So we are pleading to South Africans to volunteer and register themselves for the vaccination program so that we can reach the population immunity that is necessary.
Acting Minister in the Presidency, Dr Nthabiseng, and of course Minister of Small Business Development. Thank you very much. And Mpho, well, that's the time we have for you here for the time being. Let me throw it back to you.
Thanks, Xoli. As with time being very limited, Dr. Moleko, very quickly, if you could just tell us in the shortest terms possible what the big highlight will be if for the President to speak to the economy this evening as the country looks to hear something inspirational.
Thank you so much, Mpho. I think number one, can we get a vision? Can we be emboldened and given some hope? I think South Africans are desperate for hope. And I think that what will underpin that is if the president tells us, have the targets previously set been met? How many of those plans, those outputs targeted last year, the previous year, the infrastructure strategies, the infrastructure funds, and all the plethora of list of targets. How many have been met? How many are we on target for? How many still need to be done? An assessment high level to say, this is where we are, this is where we want to go, and this is what we are going to put in place that is new that we haven't done previously. I think the second thing, Mpho, is to say regulation. I know that from the, I want to emphasize the issue of regulation, because the pension fund regulation gives us an opportunity to use domestic resources and capital to and enhance the funding whereby the state doesn't have. I think the last thing that I would want to mention is that the state has an opportunity to use the African Free Trade Continental Agreement to robustly use and build our SMMEs, improve economic activity, improve our export capabilities. But the back of this lies SOEs, which reduce input costs. So your freight rail, your logistics, your ports, and all those infrastructure, particularly input costs of electricity, are required to be low. The input costs and lower the input costs for SMMEs and businesses. And it's an imperative that even if we are looking at reducing the cost models, improving efficiencies in our SOEs, we retain the bulk of the ownership of strategic assets and SOEs. However, even if we sell a portion of the equity, we must retain control as the state. And I think we need to look at this as South Africa going forward and growing, that we retain strategic assets, but ensure that they are used to bolster economic growth, to bolster inclusion, to bolster the growth of our SMMEs.
Thank you so much for your time. Really rushing you there. Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, development economist at the University of Stellenbosch, giving us a sense of some of the big expectations as the President takes to the podium this evening to deliver the much anticipated State of the Nation address. Thank you for your time.